Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Motorcycling Australia's Women in Motorsport interview. I'm Jemma Wilson, and I'm so lucky to be here today with Peggy Hyde, aka Margaret. Peggy has such a long and awesome history in sport. She's definitely one of Australia's first female racers. She spent a career racing road bikes. She now lives on a yacht. And yeah, we're very honoured today to hear all about her stories from the last many decades. So welcome, Peggy.
Thank you for the welcome, Jemma.
Fantastic. So I guess let's start at the beginning. How did you get into motorcycling, and what was it like in that era to be a female in road racing?
Getting into motorcycling was just about getting cheap transport. I knew absolutely nothing about motorbikes, nothing at all. I went to a motorbike shop, and first of all, I went to a scooter shop, and they said girls ride scooters. And I thought, yes, well, you're biased. So then I went next door to a motorbike shop. This was in Elizabeth Street, Melbourne. And they also said girls ride scooters. And I thought, well, that was very odd since they were selling motorbikes. And so then I went to a repair shop. Keith Holland, old timers will remember him. He was a terrific bloke. And I saw in his repair shop, he had all sorts of two-wheel vehicles. And so I put the question to him, why do they say girls ride scooters? And he said, oh, I don't know. And so my next question was, which is safer? And he said, motorbikes. And so I said, well, that's what I'll get. So that's how it started. It was as simple as that, very practical decision about transport. Then, of course, the minute I got on the bike that I had already bought and not ridden on a gravel road, I did what everybody did. I sort of kept the revs up because I didn't want to stall it, did I? And then I had no idea when the clutch was going to take up. So, of course, I did the usual thing, handful of revs, dropped the clutch, went careering down the road and into the bush. And the best thing I came up with to ensure my stability was to keep opening the throttle. And got back to the roadside eventually and trying to look totally cool and nonchalant. And the guy who'd taken me there for this, my first practice go on the motorbike that I had already bought, had stopped sitting on the ground reading his book. He was now standing up looking very alarmed. So, of course, I had to look totally cool, you see. So that's how it all started. And, of course, I discovered right in that incident that it was enormous fun. And so it went on. There was a lot of companionship then with other students who were living in digs and had motorbikes. And of course, when I brought my motorbike to the student house where I was living, everybody else had to get a motorbike as well. They couldn't have a girl in the house with a motorbike and all those blokes was without. So we finished up with 13 motorbikes in that house. Some of them literally in the house, and some of them were mine because I kept buying them. And I don't ask me why. Obviously, I got the bug. And I quickly found that pulling them apart was fun as well. So that's how it all started.
Okay, and how old were you when you went and bought this first motorbike?
I think I was 20.
Okay, and you were studying, yeah?
Yes, I was studying. I was doing a music degree at Melbourne University. This is my second year, or at the end of my first year. I'm not sure which. Very close to that crossover. Yeah.
Fantastic. And so then how did you get into racing from there? What was the road race scene like, and what was your progression to get into actually racing rather than just using your motorbike for transport?
Well, the world of motorbikes was completely different in the 60s. There wasn't the specialisation that you have today. And so by this time I had 3 Maxwell's, a Norton 750, an aerial 500 and so on. And you took whatever bike you had wherever you wanted to go, off-road or whatever. And unlike today where you buy a specialised bike to go off-road and so on, it wasn't like that. And at the time, you could go with your matchless motorbike set up for scrambles, and you could actually be competitive in scrambling, which is the forerunner of motocross.
Okay.
And so that's what I was interested in. But then Greaves and Cotton came out from England with two specialised bikes for scrambles. And so I could see at once that the matchless wouldn't do. So I dropped that idea. I did some trials. I liked that on a road bike. And but I could see that road racing was a place where you could just take your road bike without a lot of modification and race it. Mm-hmm. That's how it used to be. That's how it started.
And so was it specialized race courses, or was it?
Oh yes,
yeah.
There were road race tracks as there are today, and Phillip Island, Winton, Calder were the main ones in Victoria.
Okay. And were you the only female in those days, or were there more of you?
Yeah, I was the only woman.
Yeah.
And that wasn't particularly well received at the time. Mm-hmm. The go was that you started in D grade and you would get a steward's report. And if you're any good, you would then go to C grade. So the problem was, as I saw it at the time, I'd heard all the stories of the old men telling me, when I asked them, what about women in the past? And the stories were all unfavourable to women. And so I could see that there would be, that steward's report was likely to be biased if they knew that it was a woman they were looking at. Mm-hmm. So it happens that I had a friend who was a secretary of the Hartwell Club. She was on the committee. She was a secretary and of course on the committee. And so she knew a bit about how this all worked. So she said, when you fill in the form, don't tick rider or entrant, because there were women entrants. And so an application going through from a woman, they would assume it was a woman who owned a shop or was entering her son or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I did that. And of course, I got an open license, by which I mean there were no restrictions on it. And then I had to wait, because the next idea was not to show that there was a woman riding. And so I had to wait for Hartwell Club to run a meeting. And this would be my first D grade meeting, where I would be reported on by a steward. And because the club was running the meeting, they had control of the program. So they published surnames and initials only. And so my husband and I started at the same meeting. We parked the van a long way from the track at Winton. And we just took turns all day, and nobody thought anything of it. They just thought it was a couple of brothers. And so I got a good steward's report. It was at least, it was unbiased. And I did relatively well on that day. Because the problem arose after I then went in a couple of other meetings. And although it passed through the club application for the meeting without comment, when I applied for the next year's license, I got back a license that was restricted. And then I had a big argument that went on for a while. And eventually the national body declared that women should be allowed to race. And I got the open license. And I had no idea at the time but that was the first time that had happened in the whole world.
Okay.
I heard about it later, of course. Yes.
And then you can continue to race for a very long time. How long was your career in motorcycling?
No, I didn't only race. No, I didn't only race for about 9 years.
Okay.
The thing was that this is where the other side of it came in, particularly in Victoria.
Mm-hmm.
All sorts of, there was sabotage of my bike, and there was also no dealer was going to sponsor a woman. You would think that after I'd shown at a meeting at Calder in 1970 on equal terms on the Mach 3, along with other Kawasaki Mach 3s and similar machines, I'd outpaced all the A graders, left them for dead, dropped the record by 2 seconds, and so on. You'd think if I'd been a bloke, the dealers would have been all clamouring, race for me, ride for me, but that wasn't going to happen. And that was an impossible barrier at the time. Nothing was going to stop that. In New South Wales, made a lot of friends amongst the racers, some of the old race families. But by that time, unfortunately, my husband was not supporting me in the moral sense.
Okay.
Going on racing. So in the end, I quit and sold my last motorbike, which was very sad.
Absolutely. Yeah. To have such open, like you put it, bias is crazy, but I guess it was different times then, wasn't it?
Yes. Surprisingly, those attitudes still linger. A few years ago in Elizabeth Street, I was actually looking for a particular kind of motorbike to buy. I went into one of the shops and couldn't believe my ears when a man about my age, who was at the salesman, approached me and suggested I should look at a scooter. And I thought, well, times haven't changed that much.
It is quite generational. Like I myself have spent like 15 years in the sport, and I've had quite a nice time. And there's been a few biases, but they've not been so open because it is, considered incorrect to treat a female like that just because she's female. But you definitely were there at the beginning and had that impossible wall, whereas mine was not impossible to breach. So times have changed, but they're still changing to do, don't they? Yeah. Well,
they do have a lot of children to do.
Yeah.
They were not helped by the very loud voice of Sterling Moss, who continued to the end of his life saying, no woman can race wheel to wheel like a man. I think that was fairly damaging in the sport.
Definitely.
Contrast very much with Maury Quincy, Victorian racer, motorbikes and cars. He was famous in the 60s. And he came up to me, introduced himself and said, I've always thought and I've always said that women could not drive like a man, but you have proved me wrong. And I often think I know who is the greater man.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I've always just thought that men have had a bit of a head start on us girls, but we'll catch up eventually, hey? So I would like to jump into the 7 questions that we ask all of the ladies here on these interviews. And with your experience and history in the sport, I'm very much looking forward to your answers. So let's jump into the first one. What was the driving force behind you becoming involved in motorcycling? So we kind of heard this one a little bit, but let's go again.
Well, the internal thing was and I've experienced with other things, like that's what got me, the same thing that got me into sailing. It's having something more or less at your command, a set of forces, a set of control options, and how you make that thing do what you want to do. But there's a kind of beauty in it as well. There's an aesthetic to it. And again, working with a team of dogs, rounding up livestock. It's the same beautiful experience when it all goes well. Because as we know, with mechanical things, it sometimes doesn't go well. But that's what it was. It was that joy, fun, if you like, because the fun comes with the competitive side of it. That's always fun. And I saw that as a sort of collegiate thing. I wasn't out there to demolish all the other riders or anything like that. For me, it was going out to have fun and to see how fast I could get my bike around the track, and that meant strategic thinking about the other riders and so
on. Fantastic. What kind of challenges did you face as a woman, and how did you overcome them?
Well, as you just heard, I didn't overcome all of them at all. That first one, it seemed to me, because it was so outrageous an idea that a committee of men could sit there and say, no, women cannot race. That just seemed to me completely wrong. And all I really wanted, and I wasn't doing it for women's lib, as some of the reporters wanted to say. I was doing it because, in a way, I just wanted to play in the sandpit with the other kids. And there was no good reason that I shouldn't. Although I understood the other importance of it, and of course, that's why I persevered. You can't just give up at the first hurdle when it comes to something so important. I was only after that I found out that how it was in the rest of the world. Women were restricted to 50cc or to segregated racing, or 250 in Germany and some parts of Britain and so on. It was at least 15 years before any of that got sorted.
That's crazy, isn't it? Australia was leading it and you still had the experience that you had. So imagine what experience they had.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes.
Okay. Yes. What is the greatest gift that motorcycling has given you?
That's a difficult one. I think it's probably mainly been in the friendships. Despite all the bias and some of the nasty stuff that happened, nevertheless, there are many good race mates and friends around the sport, which have persisted across the years, even though I disappeared for 30-something years and no one knew where I was. But those friendships persisted just the same.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That is one of the most common answers with these questions when it comes to that question, that, yeah, friendships, the people that you meet in motorcycling, and you're automatically friends with them because you share such a strong passion for something.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, what do you love most about our sport?
Well, it goes back to what I enjoyed. Well, there's the track and the bike, of course. That's at the core of it. But as for the sport beyond that, it's what I mentioned before. I have a sense of collegiality with other riders on the track, even though you're competing against them. But we're all out there, in a way, doing the same thing and having fun and trying to get our bike around the track the best we can, aiming for something or another. And then there's all the amazing people who support the sport. And I think back in those days, particularly of Arthur Blizzard and Jan Blizzard, of course, who were just, the amount of time that they simply gave so that we could all enjoy it. And without those, it needs all that. You can't do it without having all those support people. And I think, and again, that's about friendships, people you can rely on too. Of course, occasionally there'd be an argument about something, but that's all par for the course. But so it's the track and the people around the track, the riders and the teams, and then the support people. That would be it for me. Yes.
Yeah, we've actually been trying to get Jen on one of these interviews as well because of her amazing experience and stuff, but she's been tripping around in a caravan and she's hard to knuckle down. All right, so this is a really good one. What life skills did you develop as a result of motorcycling?
Well, given my early motorcycling experiences, when I took, a 350 matchless in doubtful state of repair, knowing absolutely nothing, and decided to drive it interstate. And, it broke down in various ways. We won't say too much about the electrics. That's an old joke, but it's true. And I actually had to take the head off the bike. Something happened to a valve all by the side of the road without a manual. So you learn to rely on yourself and to find out how to do things yourself. And that is, I think, a very important thing to learn. How to cope with anything that might happen. And I can tell you, driving at night in a storm on an interstate road with no lights is not much fun.
I couldn't imagine so.
Yeah, survival skills, you might say.
Yeah. So you've mentioned a couple of times the mechanical side of the sport, and that you were very interested in that. So you did a fair bit of work on your own bikes and things?
Well, I did. And looking back, I can't imagine what I thought I was doing in 1963, whatever it was, when, having bought my first matchless 350, I then bought the matchless 500 and then another 350. And then I took the 500 out of the 500 barrels and I went and put them on one of the 350s because I could, because you could do that. And I discovered that it would go very fast, accelerate very hard, up to about 60 miles an hour. Learning to keep the bike going, because back then, not like today when you can buy a motorbike that'll go for a couple of 100,000 kilometres and nothing might go wrong with it.
Yeah.
So these were old British bikes and things were always happening to them. And if you couldn't fix it, you're not likely to be anywhere near a place that could fix it.
Yeah.
So you really had to learn how to do it yourself. So that's, but I was just interested in, well, I suppose, because when I bought the bike, I have to say, I didn't even know what 350cc meant. I hadn't the foggiest notion. I knew what the 350cc looked like in terms of an amount.
Yeah.
But it was quite a while before I realised it was swept volume. So I was completely ignorant. But without a manual, nevertheless, I managed to find things out and keep the bike going.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, so this is going to be a good one. If you could write a letter to your 16-year-old self, what message would you give?
Yes, that's a difficult one, because 16-year-old self, is it back then? Or is it a magic or one now?
I think 16-year-old self, let's go 16-year-old self back then with all of the knowledge that you have of how things have changed and the experiences that you had?
Well, I probably, yes, I would probably have said, stay independent. Considering what marriage meant back then. Different now, but it constrained me, and in the end pushed me out of motorbikes against my will. And yes, anyway, so I did eventually get divorced. And I didn't realize at the time that there's that sapping of your enterprise and your energy when you're not being recognized for who you are. I think. So it's important to keep that alive and look far ahead when you're 16.
Okay. And what about now? What if you were 16 into today's life, today's world? What would you say to yourself?
Well, probably much the same, but it's probably much easier now for women to think that way than it was in the 60s or 50s and 60s. 50s when I was 16.
Yeah.
Because even though the school I went to kept telling us women can do anything, it was a girls' school, but there were some things they didn't mention. And they didn't mention engineer. They mentioned white collar professions, but they didn't mention apprenticeships or anything of those things that were thought to be still, the man's world. So it was a bit restricting. And the other thing that they never mentioned, but it was assumed, was that however independent you're going to be, whatever career you're going to have, you are nevertheless going to have another role as a wife and mother. And that was never addressed all the years I was at that school. And so that was the way things were at the time. That end of it was not considered. I think even with the women's movement, because they well, it wasn't in the public discussion about how you were going to have children, or if you were going to have children, and how they were going to be raised, because it was assumed that the mother would do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Big change in this day and age for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. And our last question, what is the most popular question you get asked about motorcycling?
Well, the questions are not so much posed as questions. They're usually put as statements or sort of almost accusations. For instance, you must have had an advantage, they tell me. These are young men today telling me this. When I say young, anybody under 40. But I must have had an advantage because women are lighter than men. Astonishing. And there were, back in the day, there were around the traps mutterings that I was getting special treatment and favours. And I do have some lovely letters from a man called Ken Patterson. He was an elderly man at the time, and he died very shortly after writing to me for the last time. And he said, amongst other things, he talked about the Preston boys. It was one of the clubs, the Preston Club. And he said, he said, he said, they say this and they say that, but I just laugh at them, he said, because you don't win all the time, but you can win as often as they do. And that's the telling thing. That was one of the other sort of statements, like, well, if you're not winning all the time, then you're not any good.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but you didn't win. You only came third. Well, you know, but these statements would never be made about any rider, any male rider in the field, particularly the last one. You know.
Yeah, you were just like stuck between a rock and a hard place. Hey, you couldn't win.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I still get the odd remark like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think that 9 years is a long time to be in any sport, in any situation. And for you to have done 9 years of racing and had to put up with what you put up with, I think is a phenomenal amount of time, and well done. And thank you to you, because you definitely would have started paving that way for people like myself, and now that even younger generations coming through.
Yeah. And of course I did come back, as you know, in 2014, 15, came back onto the racetrack to race.
Yeah, I saw a photo.
And the best thing about that was that in 2016, I actually won a trophy, and I was so pleased to do that. The seniors races at McNamara Park. And so the guys there, they were terrific, and they were very welcoming, and they wanted to know how old I was. And then it turned out I was the oldest person there. And of course I was the only woman, because there aren't any other women my age.
Yes.
And because it was particularly nice to have a trophy, because I don't know where my other trophies are from the past. I have no idea. I've left them somewhere when I went sailing, I think, and I don't know where they are. And it was nice to have a trophy at the end of my life, at any rate.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for this interview, Peggy, and thank you for all that you've done for women in motorcycling. I actually feel a little bit teary. It's an amazing story. I can't believe it. I've spent my life racing, and it's been a really pleasurable experience, and I feel very sad that you didn't get to have the same experience. Yeah. But thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jemma. I'm hoping it could inspire some young people. Yeah,
absolutely. This, like, women in motorcycling at the moment, it's such an amazing time, and there are so many fast women and that can do it, because why not? Like, we're all people. And yes. I think you said in an email to me earlier that when it's not, oh my gosh, there's a female out there, that's the day that we'll have equality. And I totally agree with that, because we're all people who ride motorbikes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's right. Well,
fantastic. Well, thank you very, very much, and enjoy the rest of your road trip up north to get back on your yacht, and I really look forward to speaking to you again down the track, and maybe even meeting somewhere one day.
Yes, I hope so, Jemma.
Fantastic. Thank you.